Hello and welcome. I see participants still showing up, but I think we should get going. Welcome, welcome. It is a true pleasure to introduce Shelley, McNamara, and Yvonne Farrell, the co-founders of Grafton Architects. I'm Paul Lewis, president of the Architectural League and partner at LTL Architects. And first, I need to thank our funders, which include all of the league members in this virtual audience. And this program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council and the New York State Council on the Arts. And also thanks go out to the Irwin S. Channon School of Architecture at the Cooper Union for co-hosting the Current Work Lecture series with the League. It is wonderful to be able to hear from Yvonne and Shelley this afternoon, as this is a pivotal period within Grafton Architects. In 2018, they were the co-curators of the International Venice Biennial with a manifesto Free Space, advocating for the generosity of architecture. In addition, this year, they have received some of the most prestigious acclaims in the architectural discipline, the 2020 Pritzker Prize and the RIBA Royal Gold Medal, just to mention two. But based on the work that they will present today, one could argue that some of their most substantial work is in process and yet to be built. So this is, in a sense, this is truly a lecture that could not have occurred at any other time, and it is precisely the moment that you want to hear from architects of such importance. Grafton was founded in 1978, and although their work is fundamentally connected to Dublin and to Ireland, where for the first 25 years of the practice, all of their buildings were located, most of the work they will present today is in other countries, in other cultures, and other geographies. For architects who name their firm not based on their personal identities, but for an urban place, Grafton Street in London, the challenges of working globally in very different locales raises fascinating questions. Yet, because they argue for the importance of each place, this range of locations allows for an array of diverse and unique buildings, yet it is a totally coherent body of work. So it's very, very difficult to capture the richness, subtlety, complexity, rigor, and pleasures of Grafton's work in a short introduction. And I will keep this short. It is profound work, not just because of their plan stitched together urban fabric into porous thicknesses that intensify social life, not just because their sections are both carved into the ground and are animated by sculpting the sky, providing spaces for movement, delight, and intimacy, an unprecedented articulation of what could be called the free section, not just because they ingeniously deploy structures to convey gravity and lightness simultaneously, but because their work is based on the cultural ethics of building and speaks optimistically about human existence and our future. It is an optimism which is much needed and an optimism which is embedded in the craft of how Grafton, in their words, and I quote, adds to the crust of this fragile planet. Please join me in welcoming Shelley McNamara and Yvonne Farrell.
Hello. We would like to thank the Architectural League of New York for inviting us to present our work. In Towards a Critical Regionalism, 6 Points for an Architecture of Resistance, Kenneth Frampton recalls two of the French philosopher Jean-Paul Ricoeur's questions. 1, how to become modern and return to sources, and 2, how to revive an old dormant civilization and take part in universal civilization. Critical regionalism is an encouragement to adopt modern architecture critically for its universal progressive qualities, but at the same time reminding us that value should be placed on the geographical context of a building. According to Frampton, and I quote, the specific culture of the region becomes inscribed into the form and realization of the work. This inscription, which arises out of the inlaying the building into the site, has many levels of significance. for it has a capacity to embody in built form the prehistory of the place, its archaeological past, and its subsequent civilization and transformation across time. End of quote. We sometimes say that architecture is a silent language that speaks. The choreography of spaces needs to be actually experienced to fully understand it. Reading plans and sections does not convey the complexity of volumes, the impact of the changing light throughout the day, the human interaction in space. One of the many impacts of COVID, as we all work remotely and apart, is that we miss experiencing the variety of enclosures that architecture gives us, in experiencing life and in the human encounters with others. Lina Bobardi said, "Until a person enters a building, climbs its steps, and seizes the space in a human adventure that unfolds in time, architecture does not exist." In the absence of buildings, we speak today about a number of our projects under the title Work in Progress. We'll discuss the layers that we try to unpeel, inventing and transforming the needs of clients to give each new project the possibility of celebrating place, climate, culture, materiality, trying to heighten the awareness of each individual on this precious globe where we are. So work in progress is really the work that we have done and what we have learned. In the 1,000 offices for Bocconi University in Milan, Italy, it's a series of open air courtyards hoisted high up into the sky, forming light wells, raised gardens, so opening windows can be in each office. In the section, you see the study model, you see these courtyards, which are light filters, which protect the spaces below from the sky. But also in this section, you see the offices which are hung from these beams at roof level, that all of these offices have courtyards that allow for all the offices to have opening windows and balconies to these spaces. Also on the right-hand side, you see the three periscopes, these natural light scoops into the grand hall for 1,000 people. And architecturally, what this 66-foot cantilever of the aula hovering over this space below, which is 15 feet down below the city level, allows a relationship between the life of the city and the life of the university itself. When we did a competition in Lima in Peru, it was for a new university in a site close to the Pacific Ocean, near the 120-foot high cliffs that form the edge of the city of Lima. And we asked the question, could we harness the specific climate of that city to invent a new vertical campus with circulation outside, shaded from the sun, interweaving landscape into this section so that we had a vertical campus where everything in terms of circulation that could be outside is, and that the wind from the Pacific would irrigate this space and keep this vertical campus cool. So here we have the landscape intertwined, the circulation outside. And in terms of the times we live in, it's interesting that outside space and breeze from the Pacific Ocean is a definite advantage in terms of the life we are leading. Just outside Paris, in a place called Saclay, it's about 3/4 of an hour drive from Paris in the southwest. This was a competition that we did in a new area, which is a plateau where a number of university complexes were being relocated. And for us, what was interesting was that this was a type of Silicon Valley on a plateau, if that's not a kind of a contradiction in terms, but essentially this was agricultural land that was being transformed into a new campus. And for us, going to the site for the first time, what was really important was to find this little this little stone which fits in your hand, trying to find something of the soil and the stone of that place to bring with us as a type of talisman as we move forward in terms of the design development. And on the right-hand side are a number of references that in terms of scale, where we're trying to develop a sense of measure and a sense of judgment. On the lowest image is the beautiful plan of the Palais Royal in Paris itself, the space formed by this thin band of accommodation. The next one up is Ospedale Maggiore, this incredible building started in the 14th century in the city of Milan with its series of courtyards, which means that it survives, sorry, just going back, it survives from the 1400s into the 21st century and is still in use today. In terms of sustainability, that's pretty good going. Above that is the beautiful image of the university here in our city of Dublin. It's the Trinity College campus with the long room, with the thin band of rooms forming this enclosed garden in the heart of our city here in Dublin. And on the top is our competition response to this Institut Mines-Télécom, where it was moving with research, with offices, with teaching spaces. And so for us, the issue of arrival into this complex was really that we would make a series of courtyards, 5 external courtyards and 1 internal knuckle. And looking on this side here, this beautiful image by the Spanish sculptor, really describing light from the inside, because in our image above here, where we've chosen to use a series of vertical contours, that light from the south would filter through the north facade as you enter from the main space of the area. So this plan describes arriving from the north into the first main space. You come through the gates, you pass the cafe. At this point, you're able to view through into the garden, which has real trees planted as part of the master planning strategy. You move to the entrance, to the long hall, to this beautiful space, which is the knuckle, the pinwheel of this institution. And at this point, the major lecture theatres, a pinwheel. This is a view of the north facade, where you're really looking at the repetition of the 1.35 vertical contours, so that each of the many offices have access to the outside, have a balcony, have a way of relating either to the outside campus or within itself to the courtyards. And the choice of the precast concrete color is really in reference to that piece of ground that we had as a talisman. So here you are entering from the main university plateau. You arrive into this space, passing the cafe. You view at this point in under the central bar to the main space with its 100 trees, and you arrive to the main entrance. And at this level is the position of the library, which acts like a bridge. Here we have a view of the main space, which is enclosed by the new courtyard organization. And this image, which we love, is the section showing the trees in real ground, the car parking below the entrance. You see arrival, you come to this main space, you have a ramp which brings you up to the library, which is positioned between the main, if you like, social organization of this new university, and views down into this absolutely essential outdoor courtyard. And the image, the photograph, is describing the outside space, the arrival to this point here, the moving up the staircase in an Esherick type organization. This is the ramp that leads you to the distance for the position of the library. And that is the ramp you're seeing in the distance, and the library is positioned at this pivotal point between socializing, and the outdoor space. In following on, under the banner of work in progress, following our deep interest relating to sustainability, we entered a competition for a new university building in Fayetteville in Arkansas. It was the Anthony Timberlands Center for Design and Materials Innovation. This is the place, this area in Arkansas of Fay Jones, the architect of that wonderful Thorn Crown Chapel, which is this beautiful image of small pieces of timber transformed in a woodland setting. And on the left-hand side are these amazing no-nonsense kind of industrial buildings in the United States, which are responding directly to need. And we found this an absolutely inspirational reference. We also wanted to respond to the local climate, particularly the weather in this part of Arkansas with its heavy bursts of rain. And the brief was really very obviously central to responding to this project. And we worked with the functional requirements by, it has this fabrication shop, and we placed it at the lowest level where it could be easily serviced, and students and the general public would be able to see what is happening. And if you're a member of the public, that you could also enjoy the view into the fabrication shop from the sidewalk. So in this, these are our study models where we're really coming to terms with what is required for this building, an educational building, which was the training and making of timber as an essential material. This, in terms of plan, is showing our relationship with the city block. We place this as the sidewalk, the major road, the fabrication shop, which is at a lower level than the sidewalk, and that the service yard is here. But this becomes the focus, the main fabrication and open yard become the place where students, not only of this building, but also of the artistic block, which is part of the university, is positioned. And functionally, what we found was that the layering and the educational connection between this, what we call the section as educational connector, that we would have this fabrication shop, but it would also have a relationship in section with the other required pieces of this brief. So the layering is entrance, auditorium, classroom, laboratories, design studios, right up to the library and residence for visiting professors. But essentially what we wanted to celebrate was the wonderful versatility of timber, and that timber would be used both as the bones of the structure and also the enclosing skin, and that the building itself would be a storybook of timber. And that we chose our model to describe the main moves on the right-hand side, which is here, that taking the amazing outbursts of rain in this part of Arkansas, that we would embed these drawings, that we would embed these, if you like, they're responding to the rain, that we would have these glulam, essentially like canoes that would take the water and deal with them as part of the architectural idea of this project. So for us, I suppose it's important to state that daylight is a free resource. This is a view on the interior where you have the main fabrication level. You have the level of the sidewalk with the general public up here, a beautiful possibility of a sculpture on exhibition for the general public. The general public also being able to see into this amazing hall by virtue of transparency, and that here hung in a structure of a queen post truss, that you have a great ability of timber to perform larger scale structure. These are these huge, the main structure holding these glulam water courses up above are these 1 meter square oak main structure, as well as the tiny pieces that form the sense of the rippling and cascading roof. And here on the right hand side is an image from the side street looking into this student research building, showing the, if you like, the cascading roof and the climate of this particular part of Arkansas. And our building, in terms of the vertical position on this intersection of a busy road and a side road, is really, if you like, wanting to have a desired public and urban character on the end of this block, that the Faye Jones School would have presence and identity within Fayetteville, and that it would be a beacon or a lighthouse prominent on the corner, acknowledging the donor's family. And happily, we won this competition, and we're moving forward with it in the university, and we're working with the local architects, Modus, to complete this project. Another project that we did as a competition, it's a new special school, Konju National University in the Republic of Korea. This is a competition for a new boarding school. It's integrated into an existing university campus, and we won it together with the local firm of Space Group. And we interpreted the client's vision of being able to make a school, what they describe of discovery, of safety and belonging. They requested making a community. It's making a boarding school. It's a home for 3 years for teenagers with various disability. And with all the necessary social and academic backup to develop their skills, and also the wish of the clients to make a place that would act as a center for surrounding communities. And we loved this stated ambition because it was, and I quote, they wanted a village where you can learn about life itself. And their intention was to bring all the diverse worlds together of art and agriculture and manufacturing and learning, digital studies and play and physical activities together. So for us, what really struck us was that here was a place that teenagers, a group of teenagers, would live for 3 years in the development of their skills. Here we have the busy motorway, a road. We have the site of the university, the existing buildings. We have the site for the competition. So you're looking at this roadway, and you're looking at the part of the campus here. And we have embedded. What we did was, we had just in terms of place and climate, what we did was look at, first of all, I suppose, not knowing very much about Korea, that this drawing is really, from our point of view, looking not only at the culture, but also the physical description of the climate. And there are 4 very distinct climates in this part of Korea. We also looked at historical building types in Korea. And in particular, we analyzed 3. One was a mountain fortress, the Sanseong. The next one was the academies, which were called the Siunwon, and then the Hanoks, which were the traditional courtyard houses. So what is very beautiful about this here, the academies, is that they are really, what's very interesting about them, I suppose, is that they create worlds unto themselves, but they also form an interface between the public realm and the private realm. So there's a level of sectional overlap, which we found very beautiful and wanted to merge within our thoughts for this project. On the top of this image here is our shadow study, because the site for this school was not only on the campus, as part of the campus of the university, but also embedded close into a hillside. And we were very aware that this wonderful as the mountain is, it also casts shadows. So the brief was really for dormitories for these students to live for 3 years, teaching facilities, and also sports and cinema within their new school. I won't go into the plans in detail here, but essentially we positioned the dormitories facing east out to the surrounding countryside. We made a space bringing the mountain through and in as the main space, and positioned then the classrooms as bridges. So the classrooms are forming bridges connecting the sports section of this building complex to the living. And in terms of our historical studies, the Hanok, what was very beautiful about the traditional home was that it was essentially a series of small spaces around outdoor spaces that connected to the landscape. So for us, this was a way of, instead of thinking of dormitories as these long rooms where students would feel like they were in an institution, that we would take the 26 satellites of these dormitories and make this house. So this is really trying to take from the history of Korea to translate into these small groups of five students and one carer living together in these smaller hammocks. So we positioned the hammocks. So here is an image describing the layout of the layout of the hammocks, which they themselves are positioned along east here with their own gardens facing out to the community. That it's over a colonnade which allows the general public to pass and enjoy and connect to this building. That the landscape of the location means that the mountain moves in under these spaces, and these 4 bridge connections provide essentially 3 roof lights which bring nature into this space. So this space underneath here becomes the community space linking the existing campus of the university in through this space into here and bringing the landscape, and the landscape becomes modified to becoming the major room of the school. So here we have, if you like, the overhead, the bridges, what we call the bridges of learning overhead, and nature meanders through the new school, flowing in under the learning bridges and uniting the campus with the mountain. So the biggest room of this school is, if you like, nature invited in, sheltered by these bridges, and that the central garden is the legible social heart of the school. So for us, the School of Welcoming Edges is really not only welcoming the beautiful surrounding nature, but also the communities, the existing communities, that they would feel welcomed into the campus of the university, and that the hammocks forming this colonnade become, if you like, the elements of the colonnade that invite the local community to be part of this new complex. And we're working, I don't know whether I mentioned it, but that working together with local architectural firm Space Group, this project is now moving on, and we very much look forward to building a building for these particular clients in Korea.
This is Shelley here, and I just want to pick up from what Yvonne has been speaking about, but maybe to start with Dublin and with Ireland, because before we worked anywhere outside of Ireland, we practiced here for 25 years. And we love this quote from Raphael Moneo, which was in the Common Ground David Chipperfield Biennale, where he says, "The city that accompanies you, the city you travel in and with." So Dublin is the city which we have learned from so much. And also we wanted to use this image, which is a painting of a Dublin corner by painter Michael Caine. because it reminds us of something that Manuel de Sola Morales always says, which is that, especially in his book, A Matter of Things, he talks about architects needing to somehow transmit both to themselves and to others the sensation of cities, and not simply the, let's say, the scientific analysis of cities. And he makes a case for this thing of how we communicate sensation, especially in thinking about what one calls master plans. And this project is a competition we won in Dublin, which we're really delighted about, which is a new city library. And it's buried behind a beautiful red brick terrace of houses. And again, this image reminds us of a fantastic description by the writer Elizabeth Bowen, who described once, she described Dublin in the bricks of Dublin, that the streets seem to seal up the light like an unopened orange seals up the juice. And that's what's really interesting about working in your own place. You have to discover and rediscover each time the qualities and the sensations of living in your own place in order to make a new response, a new intervention. So this library overlooks what was traditionally a very important square in Dublin called Parnell Square, on high ground overlooking the city. It was originally a pleasure garden. And in the section you see that we make a new civic space embedded in the block, a kind of secret place that you come through the wall or the crust to the city, which overlooks the Parnell Square and faces south, and you come into this, this zenithal light, which is the public room of the library. And because this garden was once a pleasure garden, it no longer really functions totally as a pleasure garden. We wanted to reinstate this idea and to weave a sense of landscape up in and through the library. And we love the program of library. We feel that it's the one democratic institution left in contemporary society. And all these different colors show all of the different uses that this library is to accommodate. There's 5 houses onto the public space, and each of those is entered as a kind of separate suite, and then there's a big yellow lending library and mezzanine, and above there's incredible variety of uses, which makes this very important urban mix. And what's wonderful working, and it's beside a wonderful gallery, which was the house of Hugh Lane, and is now the Municipal Gallery. And what's wonderful about the library is that it's a place of what Le Proust, when he was designing his libraries in Paris, talked about it being a place of universal ties. And that architecture he discovered through this project, which was to do with regeneration of that parts of the city that he was building. He talked about the healing power of architecture, especially through the library and through the suggestive force of the atmosphere of the library and this sense of universal ties. What's also wonderful about it is the librarians, because they want to share their knowledge and access to knowledge unconditionally, where people can either just sit and read, or can, on the right-hand image, there's collective spaces which are at the upper level for performance or conference. And on the left-hand side is the zenithally lit reading room. And because of this idea of the pleasure garden, which we want to start thinking about in terms of this whole quarter and the regeneration of this quarter, we started in the library by weaving gardens and landscape right up through the building. In our work, we go back to this plan so often. the wonderful plan of St. Gall, 9th century drawing. And what's beautiful about it, first of all, is it as a drawing, but also the way it describes a world. And the monastic model is something that we keep referring back to. Yvonne spoke about the building outside of Paris, which is like a contemporary monastery. But the monastic model is also interesting because it was a carrier and a protector of culture and learning. It wasn't just a religious institution, for instance. And what we love about this plan is that it shows, when you look at it in detail, it shows churches, houses, stables, kitchens, workshops, breweries, infirmary. There's this wonderful mix of elements brought together in one place. And we particularly enjoyed this when we were looking at, at this building in Kingston. Slight technical glitches here. This building in Kingston, which is a university, which we call a warehouse of ideas, where Kingston University wanted to make this new town house, an open house, and they had this wonderful idea of bringing together unexpected types of uses, for instance, urban dance together with a quiet library. And we looked at Utsen's showroom in Copenhagen, and we loved this idea of making a kind of warehouse which would feel in some way a bit like Utsen's sense of this warehouse also feeling like a kind of woodland with the trees above. And so we made this very open structure, which, as I say, we called a warehouse of ideas. And we made this loggia, which surrounds it on three sides. And in a sense, it comes away from much of the work that we've been doing, which is very much about walls and mass. And so we wanted to make a very porous edge where this building is almost inside out, and that you would circulate around the edges, overlooking the Thames in the distance and a very busy road facing west. And that this would allow the building to open outwards and also to invite the community in. And the diagram of the structure, because we used the term structuring space in relation to the St. Gall plan, but the diagram of the structure on this image shows what we were looking for, which is a very loose weave. And we really like this kind of loose fit idea that not every square meter has to be accounted for in terms of program, but that somehow that a building can expand and contract, or the life of a building can expand and contract within this loose warehouse type structure. The other thing we spent a lot of time looking at was how we could make a heart to this building, which houses noisy and quiet, active and passive, places to be alone as well as places to be together. And we thought about the lecture theatre as being a courtyard space, that it would be like the Bouleuterion of Greece, where the councils used to gather in these very tight, intimate spaces. And we tried to make this space feel like a democratic space, and that it would feel external even though it's internal, and again that it has this loose fit feeling because students can sit in it or lie in it or learn in it depending on what's happening, and that it's a place that people can wander through and then it can close when there's an event happening. And we turned it, you could say, back to front, where the stage or the performance or the speaker is also facing the foyer and the entrance hall, so that the whole space can open up and the events can be enjoyed by everybody. And this is the nature of the space, where you can see dancers perhaps moving between their dance studios on the upper level, on the first floor level, and that the seating would connect the first floor level with the ground level, and that the quiet libraries up above, you see those windows, that the library and the librarians and the students using the library can enjoy the silence of the space, but at the same time view into this courtyard and see what happens. And again, the porous edge, which is this idea of not making walls, of making this edge which allows students to circulate, to sit in the sun, makes places for people to stand waiting for the bus. And we've planted vines on this facade, reminiscent of some of the famous vines in Hampton Court. And the other building that we're doing in London, which is under construction at the moment, is the London School of Economics, which is a very different story, let's say. And this is in a very dense urban site. And so we looked at how much free space we could leave in terms of how the citizen or the city could enjoy access to the university, or where the students and the university could come together. And we loved the undercroft space, the bottom image on the left, which is the undercroft of Lincoln's Inn Chapel. And what's wonderful about that space is that it's completely open, there's no door. And there is a chapel up above, but there's a staircase, a discrete staircase to the chapel, and the door to the chapel happens on the upper level. So there was that thing of delaying the point of control or the point of entry. In terms of structure, it goes from a huge sports hall at the basement level to tiny offices up above. So the diagram, the structuring diagram of the green and the red and the black is a series of rotating and interlocking changes of structure, like the way that a forest grows with the branches getting smaller and smaller as you go up, and also with the sense of rotation as well as axis. And this leads to this kind of space where you're actually inhabiting the transition structure, what we would call the transfer structure. Instead of transfer structure being a kind of boring thing hidden within the depth of a floor, what we felt was that we should inhabit that point of transfer from the large to the small. So you feel these weighty columns and beams supporting all of the research and teaching offices and lecture spaces up above. And that this space would feel like a great hall with a big staircase in the distance, taking you up to the point of most control, but that somehow this space would be open to the city. And a huge challenge for us to deal with 55-metre frontage onto Lincoln's Inn Fields. Our building is on the right-hand side of this piece of London. We were trying to capture the atmosphere of London. And directly across the way is the Soane Museum, which is very sobering to be addressing the same civic space as a piece of work by John Soane, and this wonderful museum which we love. And just some construction photos of this grand stairs and the tree structures and what they're starting to look like. And this elegant stair, which will deal with large groups of people winding their way up to the more private spaces up above. And this sense of the forest of beams and columns, which is the transfer structure between large and small spaces. And this is our study model, our competition model, showing the scale of the building and how it relates to Lincoln's Inn Fields. And one of the projects that we finished recently, as well as the Kingston project, is this School of Economics in Toulouse, which is a very similar program to the Bocconi building, but in a completely different city, a wonderful brick city of Toulouse, with this huge river and beautiful quay walls and raised pieces of landscape. And our building is the little one peeping through the gap in the trees, overlooking this kind of heroic river. And what was important for us about this project was how we would deal with the very particular nature of the site, where we're occupying a breach in the medieval wall. And we made a kind of collage of the elements that we found in Toulouse, of buttresses and cloisters and colonnades, and made this choreographed series of spaces which make these big window openings and frame views of the city from the world within. It's interesting, having just finished this building in November, and going back and looking at the plans, and when you're very familiar with the building, you forget where you started. And what we really liked going back and really looking at these plans is that if you look at them, it morphs from a kind of perimeter scheme to a free series of free forms at the top floor. The basement and lower ground is on the left, and then it's a walled space, and then some elements start to come free, and there's big rooms which form gaps which make views of the city, and then it becomes much more free and open at the top. And you can see this in the section as well. And we were really delighted to hear that the builders, when they used to see these plans up in the site office, they called this the butterfly, which is also interesting because it takes that thing of morphing from one element into another. And this was a very highly worked project in terms of how we would deal with the climate. We used the fire stairs to make these 6 feet, which anchored the building into the ground, and we connected these buttress towers with colonnades. We pleated and folded walls, all done differently and modulated by our environmental designer, so that the wall facing south is different to the one facing east and facing west. And so they're doing a job as well as giving us the mass and the scale and the richness that we wanted. And I suppose the most important thing Yvonne mentioned in Lima is how you make a building which really connects with its city. And the climate in Toulouse allowed us to make this open interior protected from wind and rain, but also to make these big windows which bring the city right into the building. And I love that image of the 2 students standing, having a very quiet conversation, and they can overlook their city. And the sky cloister, which is that element which forms the kind of gateway to the city, where professors and students and teachers can move from one building to the next. Moving outdoors, but protected from the elements. And again, in terms of the current climate, let's say, and the current problem of COVID, that thing of that sense of well-being and being connected to fresh air and connected to the sky and connected to your place is something we've always felt, even before and way before this, this current crisis. Is that again, going back to the monastery, the idea of the cloister and the monks being able to move around a courtyard with the sky as their ceiling, protected from the rain and the wind, outside, but also protected. And this is like a kind of a vertical weave of cloisters and courtyards, that it moves up in sections, starts on the lower level and reappears at the upper level. So it's like this thread of social space weaving its way through the project. And then going back just to looking at it in its context, again, beside the Midi Canal, and you see the sky cloister, which we call the sky cloister, and the lower cloisters and colonnades. And they have this very civilized thing where they talked about having cocktail terraces between lecture spaces, which we thought was really impressive. And I'm just going to finish with, again, because we're talking about work in progress. Yvonne always says that one thing leads to another. And we've touched on this idea of structuring space, and we've touched on the idea of the Arkansas project, which is made in wood. And this was an earlier study competition for a School of Architecture And we became very involved, almost one could say obsessed with this idea of a reciprocal structure, which is, so we were at the same time doing a competition, which I will also show you, for an Irish embassy in Tokyo. And we discovered that when we were looking up the reciprocal structure, which is ancient Chinese and Japanese way of using wood, where you have these interlocking three-dimensional grid, which works both as a mat and as a series of columns and beams. But the interconnection and interdependence we really loved. And what's fantastic about it, because it's a rotating structure, it has an axis if you want it to have an axis, or it can work diagonally. It has little grids which become big grids. It was perfect for making roof lights, so that you could get this filter of light between the pieces of wood. It was also perfect for making bigger spans, or that the beams could become deeper to contain a review space or an exhibition space. So it was a wonderful study and exploration for us, this project, simply in terms of how that structure might work. And then we looked at that in relation to a vertical reciprocal structure for Ireland House in Tokyo, which is the embassy in Tokyo. And we liked just like Kingston townhouse, using the word house, the term house, is very important, because it gives a sense, or this idea of intimacy, as well as perhaps the monumental or the totality, but that there would always be this kind of sense of the intimate within whatever project we do, that the two really need to go together, the monumental and the intimate, the heroic and the intimate. And the vertical reciprocal structure for this project was a development, perhaps one could say, and you could say a precursor of the Arkansas project, where we were thinking about how tall can you build in wood, which is not so easy in Tokyo because it's seismic, as there's also challenges in Arkansas in relation to that. But we were also fascinated by the Katsura Palace, and because we were looking at Japan, we were looking at joints, we were looking at structure. This is the plan of the way the reciprocal structure works. We were looking at, our engineer asked four of us to put our hands together and to support a heavy person in the office, and how easy it is when four people work together. And symbolically, there's something very beautiful about the interlocking of small elements to make something bigger. So the plan on the right is our Ireland House, and the plan on the left is Katsura. And I suppose that says something also about tradition and thinking. Yes, so this is our Ireland House courtyard, the domestic space, a welcoming space with an ancient tree, and again using the thing of the challenge of using wood in a country where they are probably the most skilled in the world, in Japan and also in China and other ancient and contemporary cultures, where much more so than in Ireland, and it's something that we're really learning from. But I just wanted to end with this image, because it somehow describes, when we talk about work in progress, you always think, well, where are we going and what are we doing? And Yvonne and I have had a number of interviews and discussions on Zoom or Skype or whatever, or watched certain lectures. And there was one about 2 weeks ago given by Helen Thomas, who's an architect and a writer and a teacher. And she talked about the mysteries encountered when finding reality. And the discussion that we had afterwards, well, what is the reality we are looking for? And we carried that conversation on with an Italian wonderful writer, Fulvio Irace. And we were talking about how he was asking us about digital tools as against hand tools. And we were talking about the difference between an image and reality. When you see the image of a painting, how perfect it looks in your favorite books with the colors all perfect, and then you see the reality, and it's a raw canvas, and there's splodges and splashes of paint, and you're kind of almost shocked by the crudeness of the reality of the canvas. And Fulvio Irace was talking about the first time he went to see Tempietro in Rome by Bramante, how disappointed he was almost. And he, in the way that Italians can do, talked about a building being a sum of imperfections, and that perhaps beauty is like a cloud, that it's continually changing. But what's wonderful about architecture is that by its nature, it's optimistic and always looking forward. And that's something that we find is continually renewing, that you're looking for the perfection, or you're looking for the next world, let's say, and something about this image that makes us feel that we're looking to the future, looking to make a new world. So I'd like to end on a note of optimism and just say, Yvonne and I were listening at lunchtime today on our Irish news to a woman whose birthday today is, she's 107 years old. And she was on radio saying, keep courage, keep up your spirits, you know, this will pass and there will be good times in the future, and this will seem like just a small speck in your memory. And so we feel that the current situation offers enormous challenges, but also fantastic opportunities for us to recalibrate our values. So thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Shelley. It's fantastic to see the work. It's such rich work. Can be looked at through so many different lenses, so many facets. And I know I want to talk about your approach to section, your approach to plan, to enclosure and materials. But I want to first start by kind of picking up on what Shelley, you just mentioned about the optimism and using this time to recalibrate values. And you allude to the fact that open air and the role of bringing the exteriors into the building is something that's now in even greater demand. But I wanted to have you continue to kind of talk about the question of recalibrating values. What values do you feel have to shift, or what kind of recalibration needs to happen? And Shelley, if you could pick up on that.
Well, maybe it refers back a little bit to our Free Space manifesto, because we had to think about all those things when we were asked by the president of the Biennale to make a Biennale which represented our values. And that was a tall order to actually think about how to articulate that, because architecture is such a complex discipline, let's say. But one of the things we felt was so important was the humanism, the humanistic component of architecture, that it's about well-being, and it's to frame people's lives and to serve, let's say. There's a really interesting story. Kevin Roach, in an interview, he was speaking about the Ford Foundation and how he felt that the role of architecture was to really deal with this, to deal with well-being. And that building is a fantastic building for us to continually go back and look at. But he tells this funny story of being interviewed for a job in Manhattan somewhere, and the client, who was a very rich person, said, "You're Irish?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "I love the Irish. They make very good servants." And he said, rather than becoming offended, he thought, well, that's what architecture is. We're here to serve. And there was something very true about that, that it's, you know, that one is happiest when one makes a space that people respond to, and they may not even notice it, but they love it. So I think in terms of values, in a sense, if you think about the first principles of architecture, they're the most challenging values to live up to, because it's to do with the manipulation of light, the manipulation of our environment, the control of our environment, the lifting of the spirit, function, how to make a building work. And I'm not sure that when I talk about recalibrating values, it's actually going, I don't like using the term going back to first principles, because I actually think it's going forward to first principles, because first principles are the most inspirational things to actually keep reminding ourselves about. What are we trying to do? What is this space going to be? What is the role of architecture in this context? Actually, that was one of the interesting things about the Venice Biennale. It was the different ways that different architects interpreted the role of architecture in different conditions. For instance, Marina Tabassum from Bangladesh spoke about architecture becoming more invisible in order to be more present. And that one can go from that, let's say, invisible presence to making something which represents and excites and is very present physically. So it has an enormous range. And I think what's wonderful about it is that, you know, it has immeasurable depths if one can just try and reach them.
I mean, I think one of the, I mean, the way in which you use and have developed section does not kind of see first principles as somehow a regression. I mean, these are extraordinary sections. I mean, these are advanced. They're complex. They're anything but familiar in some sense, because they're so unusual. And I wonder, Yvonne, if you could kind of talk more specifically about, you know, how you theorize section, how you produce section, and its connection to these issues, these kind of first principles that Shelley mentioned.
What's amazing about architecture is that it is an art form and part of business, but it's commissioned. So when we are approached and each project begins, it has a kind of it has something in it that is unique to its future reality. And what we try to do is we work on it from a number of directions. Obviously, there's where is it and what's its place and what size is it and section. Take for instance what I began with today, the Bocconi section. That essentially that was 1,000 offices in the city of Milan. It needed a big room for 1,000 people, and then a number of very large rooms. And the issue of how do you deal with that kind of complexity, and how do you find a simplicity that makes a new DNA? How do you find it? How do you find the story of each project? So it's really, in terms of the section, it's also to do with containment, say within city positions. That section, we have said that, you know, the plan is kind of the rational thinking, and that the section is the emotional component, because it is that line between ground and sky. That in the Bocconi project, the matrix of the offices above, you know, satisfies the 1,000 offices, but it also is a filter, a light filter from the hot Milanese sun. And then the carving into the ground, the kind of scoops, is really that a building is contained within a city structure, and bringing the light in. I mean, for us, it was an amazing thing of the section when we were doing that project, which is many years ago now, moving the Aula Magna to that corner, the most symbolic corner, and having or delaying the entrance from a busy corner, giving it time, so you drop down and you enter 15 feet below ground level, are kind of practical considerations of human movement, but then provide a section that is connecting back to city. So there's the process of architecture is at one level based on the practicalities of requirements, like in Lima, where we had a very tight site. It was long, like a boomerang. It had big laboratories, smaller rooms, like Russian dolls. So we used the roof of the bigger ones down below to become the gardens that were a bit like Machu Picchu. So we were trying to weave in history and section, and also you're 12 degrees down from the equator and the sun is really hot. Okay, we have a fog that comes in, or a cold current, and it's always in 20 degrees-ish Celsius and has a breeze. But we were trying to invent a way of have a section that was one like a carved mountain, another was protecting from the sun, another it was a vertical campus, and we could, because we were building our first project in South America, where looking at Mendes de Rocha's and other wonderful architects in South America, they were able to use the sense of openness in the section for social overlap. So we're interested in light, and we're interested, like Shelley has referred to, that we're interested in something functioning. We're interested also in invention. So yes, we have a foot in adoring the kind of ancient past, because there are proofs of buildings, that they have been successful, like the one we showed for Ospitale Maggiore from the 1400s, and is still working as a building. And the section of that is held by these courtyards and beautiful outdoor staircases on pivotal moments. So the section begins with the overlay on the plan and an invention about controlling light and air and delight.
And it really seems to be a section that moves in two different directions for almost kind of different magical reasons, right? The kind of carving into the ground and the carving of the sky, and kind of positions this super interesting space that is both kind of ethereal and and weighted at the same time, right? It's moving in multiple directions. They're extraordinary spaces that you've produced. I'm curious, in part because so much of design often takes place in the discipline nowadays with three-dimensional modeling. How do you still work with the plan and the section as autonomous tools, given the way in which your plan is so different than your sections in what they do? I'm curious how you work relative to those two-dimensional representations. Maybe Shelley, you can address this.
Yeah. Well, we're pencil people, so we sketch all the time. I'm not sure I always agree with Yvonne in relation to the section being emotional and the plan being rational, but that's one of those nice conversations we have regularly. But yeah, we work in plan and section, we work in elevation, we work in diagrams, we work in cartoons, we work in anything that will help us to go from A to B, because I'm just thinking as you're speaking about sections, I mean, some of these they don't come easy. I remember Toulouse was extraordinarily difficult because the geometry of the site, the wish to bring big things up among the offices, which were the small things, the wish to make something which had some solidity to the city and at the same time felt open to the city. So it was full of stress, let's say, full of Sturm und Drang. I mean, that project to get to the point where it could start at ground level in the way that it needed to occupy its site, and then at the same time have that kind of openness that was necessary. And of course, it's not just Yvonne and myself in the office. You know, we have a fantastic team of people, and we have fantastic directors and partners and people much more talented than we are, and much more fluent and able to make wonderful models and make fantastic images. And so we're surrounded with that kind of support, and that kind of inspiration, which is one of the things we miss right now, because you could see me struggling with my PowerPoint, for God's sake. You know, it's that kind of basic, but the pencil, there's nothing like a sketch from our point of view. And actually, we were just speaking today that working remotely from each other, even with architects that we know very well, words don't explain what you mean. You have to make a sketch. There's nothing like a sketch or a drawing to communicate. That's the way we communicate, through drawing, through models. So it's the tool of our trade. But I do think that when we're thinking, even if we're thinking in plan and section, it's not that it's two-dimensional. You know, because we were educated like that, we're imagining a space, even if it looks like a two-dimensional thing. It's like the score of music. You know, it's a language. It's our hieroglyphic.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean that they were two-dimensional, but in a pejorative sense, but more in the sense that in the act of being able to distinguish what they are and their agency, you've been able to develop a way in which the plan operates in a kind of a thickness, the relationship between the city and the building, and ultimately between a kind of plan and into the space that the section then starts to unfold internally in a really extraordinary way. But it seems to me that the fact that you think about the plan and section as having different agencies, and maybe I find it fascinating that you have slight disagreements about the argument of, you know, the one being, you know, emotional and one being kind of logical. But the fact that you could even kind of articulate their difference in a world where we're often, you know, developing everything three-dimensionally simultaneously at all times, I think is super interesting. I want to shift a little bit. There's been some questions in the chat talking about materiality, questions about how you work with materials. And so I want to kind of ask a little bit about the role of mass timber in the Arkansas project. And in part because so much of your work has made incredibly effective use of the kind of contrast between concrete as an expressive structure versus an inlay of wood as a kind of tactile kind of articulation at the human scale. How has the Arkansas project presented different challenges to you because you're working largely with one material, mass timber, and then other filigrees of wood internally? Yvonne, can you kind of talk a little bit about your foray into mass timber and your relationship to kind of reinforced concrete and some of the questions related to those?
There's a beautiful building not far from here in Dublin by Dean and Woodward, and it presents a huge selection of the stones of Ireland. And when you enter into that building, you can see the range that Ireland has to offer. And when we did this project for the competition in Fayetteville, what really excites us about doing this project is that we feel, in the same way as the Dean and Woodward building is about samples of stone, that we hope that the building in Fayetteville will be a place where that the range of what timber can do will be, that the building will be an exhibition, that it won't be just the building that has the main floor and the various rooms, but that the building itself will be what we call it, like a storybook of timber, but also that there's this, as you say, the kind of smell and tactility of timber is really enjoyed. That what does interest us is that we have finished a building which Shelley described in Kingston in London. And what's interesting about it being a concrete frame and being quite a lean concrete, precast concrete building, and in terms of its embodied carbon, it has its own sum. And we're looking at this timber building from the, if you like, from the beginning of its own story. That it's not that that timber is picking up where the concrete industry is kind of taken off. The concrete industry in its mass production is one direction. What we don't want to do, I suppose, is to look at timber like a kind of a flat pack version of concrete, a kind of a thinner concrete. We would like to explore that the essence of timber in its own strengths. That what's really beautiful about Faye Jones's work is that, and in the same way, like the amazing image of the Rietveld red chair, the red and blue chair, where the kind of simple, you know, that there's an image where Rietveld has laid out all the various elements of the red and blue chair with very simple, ordinary materials all in a line. And then it's transformed into the poetic red and blue chair with the red and blue plywood, with the softwood, the black and the yellow. So it's an abstraction, it's a piece of sculpture, it's a chair, and it's really transformed simple materials. And I think that that's what we are aiming for in the Anton Timberland Center in Fayetteville, that we look at the possibilities of timber within Arkansas, within the United States, and that it's not really a kind of a brown version of concrete, that it actually has its own character, and that when you think of, say, the cathedral in Salisbury, and you have oaks from the 1300s, that is there a 21st century equivalent of making this beautiful ship in Fayetteville that has all the good things that timber can bring, because people respond to timber in a completely different way than they do to concrete, let's say. There's some emotional component, going back to that word again, but there's some sensual component in timber which we would like to tap into and understand and work with craftsmanship. I mean, it's I suppose it's a bit like basket weaving or the craft. You know, there's a fantastic tradition in the making and crafting, and it would be it's really to try and keep the level of craft in buildings, whether it's concrete or whatever. But in this particular case, our research and our working with the university and with Modus and the whole team, that we make a building that celebrates the possibilities of timber, not that you get it in a kind of a kit and you put it together, but that it is crafted.
Yeah. Well, within that project, it seems like you're pushing mass timber to a kind of almost an expressive end, where, I mean, the canoes, that sketch was amazing about somebody standing within the thickness of mass timber as a kind of gutter, and then immediately adjacent to it, the kind of fine filigree the trusses that are cascading down, almost like kind of liquid wood, if you will, is quite extraordinary. So we have there's a question I want to shift to because it moves to questions of facades and elevations. And so the question comes in: I've noticed a consistent interest in vertical elements in your facade design, be it slender, thinner stone sheets or broad strokes that run vertically through the facade. And how is this related to your notions of placemaking? And maybe Shelley.
Well, yeah. Bocconi is solid mass wall. So yeah, but I suppose in it's at a very simple level. Some buildings need to let a lot of light in and are about repetition. And repetition is really hard to deal with. And windows are really hard to deal with. And it's much easier to make walls than to make windows. I know that sounds very simplistic, but especially, say, in the Paris project in Saclay, where we had a 200-meter long facade, all with offices, all needing windows. And that thing of repetition and rhythm was crucial. And we thought about music, we thought about Rasmussen's piece about rhythm in his book, Experiencing Architecture. And we tried to find a way of using rhythm and repetition, which would deal with, for instance, a north-facing facade, but the deep fins or deep elements could capture the light coming from the south so that the facade didn't feel cold, but would feel warm. So that we were thinking about them as being light-catching elements as well as enclosing elements. And also the idea of something being able to change from being open and porous, I suppose like a concertina or a, you don't have concertinas probably, but a melodeon, an accordion, that it can open and close depending on the light and depending on the orientation, depending on the need for security, all of those things. So I think when we're doing projects like that, we have to simplify themselves for ourselves, because again, they're so complex. And we, in the Saclay project, the Paris project, we talked about vertical contours, that we thought about the vertical strata being about contours. And again, we've looked a lot at Italian architects because we were steeped in that when we were going to Italy a lot. And the Italian rationalists are not afraid of big, long walls of repeated rhythms. You know, they can just make, they could just make either competition projects or build projects, just make these amazing walls which just had a sense of authority and grace. Pagano that we looked at in Milan, and many others. So yeah, in Toulouse then it was different because we had all these buttresses and solid brick walls, and at the same time we had a couple of hundred offices, and so we felt we needed some balance between repetition and surface and mass in order to anchor the building. In Lincoln's Inn Fields, again, a lot of compartmentalized space as well as large spaces overlooking the fields. And so that was very much about proportion and composition and I suppose trying to make a surface which has a sense of presence and depth and isn't dependent on aluminium, let's say. That it's not just dependent on curtain walls and aluminium, that it goes beyond that. And Yvonne was talking about craft. And when you look at again, going back to the first principles in architecture about light and shade and mass and rhythm and window reveals and reflecting light and materials which people can connect with emotionally, physically, like the touch of. I mean, what's really interesting now in terms of the research into material, we discover that stone is the most sustainable material to use, both in terms of how it's quarried and in terms of how it's made, because it's geology that makes the miracle of stone, and in terms of new ways of how it can be used in ways which strip things back, but also make the use of stone maybe much more sophisticated in the future, that it's not just something that's sawn down and hung as a piece of decoration on a building facade. So there are all those things that are conflicting things that are coming at us, particularly now, because we all have a responsibility as architects to really think about how we use resources. But every move we make is challenged because of the crisis, and that's a good thing. That we know our materials better, we know where they come from, what damage they do, how can you make up for that? How can you balance that? I mean, it's a very interesting time to and very challenging, just thinking about that whole thing of how we use resources.
Yeah. I want to end on another question that's come in, which I think is kind of goes to some of the kind of heart of what you presented. So you've worked for many years in Ireland, your home country, building an incredible portfolio of projects, and more recently have been building around the world. Has your way of working, in particular, your building on local and the specific, shifted or changed as you now practice in places where you spend less time and that's not your home? I think so Yvonne.
I think that we are citizens of the earth, and just following on what Shelley has been saying about materials and where they come from, I think what we have become more and more aware of is, as architects, that since 2008, more than half of the people of the world live in cities. So what we build is affecting the crust of the earth, and that, I suppose, from our point of view, each place demands the highest, if you like, physical response to its place, and that architecture has the ability to heighten your awareness of where you are. Like, if you think of when Shell described the building in Toulouse, when you are standing on one of those terraces, you're in the building and you're looking at the city, what is really palpable is that you are more aware of the city of Toulouse because of a contemporary building than if you just made any building and just sealed it up and didn't have that experience. Or in Lima, that you are aware, hopefully, that in the distance is the Ande mountain range and in the other distance is the Pacific Ocean. I think that awareness of where you are on the earth is not just a coordinate on a globe. It's a cultural kind of acupuncture. So what we like to do, we are building here, we are building in our own country, but it's an island in the Atlantic, and it's 5 million people, and it's small, but we are, and we hope to build more here. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity, and very, it's an incredible honor to try and land ideas in particular places on this earth. And the earth is a very beautiful element in the universe, and we're very honored to be architects. So I think that, okay, we mightn't be building down the road, although we actually are. There's other projects we haven't presented to you today. We are building here in our own country, and it's an honor to do so. But I do think there's a choice within the architectural spectrum. You can either build as a kind of a homogeneous thing that can be anywhere on the globe, or as a discipline, we can say, what is the particular characteristic and functional, cultural uniqueness of this particular place on the earth in terms of its shadow, its light, its season, its seasonality. All those things are the palette of our discipline. So I think we are always honored to get a new project, and wherever on the globe that it touches, we truly try to excavate cultural and phenomenal and ordinary thing, that where the sun shines, where the wind blows as well, and that you can open a window and enjoy the very constant thing of how the sun animates or how the season animates.
Thank you. That's a fantastic way to conclude. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you both. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Shelley. It is extraordinary work, and we are honored that you took the time to walk us through it and to provide us some clarity to it. It's been wonderful. So thank you both. Thank you, Anne Rieselbach and Katharina Flaxman of the League, for making this happen. And thank you all for attending this extraordinary lecture. Have a fantastic day. So thank you again.
Thank you, Paul, for your generous comments, which are very encouraging for us.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to see the work and to hear about it in more detail. I wish this could go on longer, but we will till next time. So thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.